In this lesson, we will continue our exploration of one-point perspective by creating yet another three-dimensional burst. In our last two examples, we talked about the element of our shape and form. Shapes, of course, are two-dimensional, and forms, of course, are three-dimensional. We use perspective to transform our shapes into three-dimensional forms. We began by cutting out simple geometric shapes. Then using point perspective, connecting our center point to the corners of our geometric shapes, making these shapes transform into forms, now making them appear to have a third dimension. We then dug even deeper into perspective by connecting all of our lines from our point to all of the corners of our geometric shapes, making them appear to be even more form-like, having a third dimension. In this lesson, we are going to push our perspective even further, making our forms appear even more three-dimensional by using the element of our value, creating lights and darks to create three-dimensional forms.
All right, so we're going to be moving on to our final version of point perspective. In our first lesson, we cut out geometric shapes and we used our point line to connect to two corners of our geometric shapes, turning them into forms. This was our most simplified version. Next, we moved on to creating our forms to look even more three-dimensional, where we connected our point to each of the corners of our shapes. For our last lesson, we're going to be mixing these two methods together to create our final product of one-point perspective. So, what you're going to need for this lesson is a white piece of paper, a ruler, a Sharpie, a pencil, and colored pencils, which we will get to later in the lesson. What we are going to start by doing is creating our geometric shapes once again. In this lesson, we are not going to be connecting to all the corners where you can see the lines going through the shapes. We're going to be keeping them whole like in the first lesson, except we're going to draw them, not cut them out. I'm going to go over all of these instructions with you. What I'm going to ask for in this lesson is that we create 6 shapes, okay? 6 geometric shapes. Again, we're not working with organic shapes, just geometric shapes. Now, if you have a template that creates squares or circles, that might be really helpful for you. You can use your ruler to create shapes. That might make it a bit easier. I would like you to make sure that you start with your pencil first, because if you make a mistake with a Sharpie, you cannot erase it. So I'm going to get started. I'm going to start by putting my point in the center of my paper, right? We're creating those shapes kind of looking like they're sitting around a campfire. You can do your shapes at different heights, okay? So I'm going to create 6 shapes going around my fire. And again, I don't want them to be too small. I don't want them to be too big, okay? I'm just making them a nice medium size. So I'm going to start by doing a triangle. Nice. And I think I'm going to do a square up here, but I'm going to make this square a little bit bigger. And again, you can use a ruler for this step. I am doing it freehand, but a ruler might be much better. I'm going to do a circle pretty close to the point, like that. Ooh, I'm gonna do I think I'm gonna do a pentagon. I have not done a pentagon yet. That will be pretty cool. So pentagon has 5 sides. And I am going to do, let's see here, I'm gonna do a rectangle. I'm gonna do a rectangle way out here. And I think I'm also going to do a hexagon, and I'm going to do it pretty close. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, those look pretty Awesome. So I have my 6 shapes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They are all geometric, not organic. First step is done. Now we're going to move on to connecting our points. Again, we are not going through our shapes like in this one. Like we see here, we're not going through our shapes, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to connect from my point to each of the corners. Again, we are not cutting through our shapes, okay? That's a big thing to keep in mind. So if I'm doing this square, I'm not going to connect up to here. That's going to go through. I can, however, connect to all 3 of these corners, okay? Again, make sure you're lining up with the point. This isn't lined up yet. Really check yourself and make sure it's lined up. We've had 2 versions of practice with this, so we should start to better understand how to make this 1-point perspective work. That looks awesome. As you can see, they're all bursted. I do not have any lines going through my shapes, however. Well, these are now forms. They're no longer shapes. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over my shapes and my lines that made these shapes into forms with a Sharpie so they stand out. You might want to put a piece of paper or a messy mat underneath your art piece so the Sharpie does not stain a table. Please make sure you do that. All right, I am going to go over all of these with a Sharpie. You can use a fine point or an extra fine point with a skinnier tip. I'm just using a normal fine point. That looks awesome. We're gonna make this look even better by adding in our color with our colored pencil. We're also going to be introducing another element of art. So we were talking a lot about shape and how shapes are 2-dimensional and how when you use perspective, you turn these shapes into 3-dimensional forms. But a way that artists make artwork that's 2-dimensional. This is a 2-dimensional piece of art. It's flat. It is not a sculpture or 3D. The way artists make 2-dimensional pieces of artwork appear 3D is by using the element of art value, which we are going to be creating with our colored pencils.
Our final step of this lesson is going to be adding value to our forms to make them appear even more 3-dimensional.
All right, so we finished using our ruler to create our 3-dimensional forms, bursting out using 1-point perspective. Now we're going to push it a little bit further by introducing the element of art value into our art piece to make our forms appear to be even more 3-dimensional than they already are. This is a trick artists use to make 2-dimensional works of art. 2-dimensional meaning this is a flat piece of artwork. It's on a 2-dimensional plane. Artists use value to make 2-dimensional works of art appear to be even more 3-dimensional. So the first thing that we're gonna do is we're actually gonna move our art piece out of the way and we're gonna create something called a value scale. So what I'm doing is I'm just drawing a rectangle. It does not need to be measured. This is just a simple, quick thing, doesn't need to be perfect. And I'm just going to split it into a couple of spaces. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You don't need 10, you don't need 20, 7 or 8 is perfect. And again, we're creating a value scale. Nice and simple, okay? So what we're gonna do with our value scale is we're gonna pick out one of our colored pencils. Colored pencils are gonna work best for this activity, I wouldn't suggest markers. Crayons and colored pencils are gonna work really, really well. So I'm gonna pick a color that you're gonna be able to see pretty well. I think this violet's gonna work nicely. When we create a value scale, value meaning light to dark, the lightest value is created by the most light hitting an object, and the darkest values are the least amount of light that are hitting an object. When we want to create our lightest value, we're going to be pressing lightest with our pencil. So light and light. I'm not going to hold my pencil up here. I'm actually going to hold my pencil back here. So this is a really cool trick to kind of make you use your pencil to create light values. So instead of holding my pencil here, I'm going to start here, and I'm just going to press really, really light. That is a super nice light value. It might even be a little bit challenging to see on the camera. Now I'm going to inch my way up a little further on my pencil, and I'm going to press a little bit harder to get a darker value that's still pretty light. As you can see, this was really light. This is a little bit darker. I'm going to inch my way up my pencil a little more. I'm going to press a little bit harder to have a darker value. This does not need to be colored in nicely. This is just practicing using your pencil to create value, light to dark. So it doesn't need to be colored in perfect. Now I'm going to move my pencil up a little bit more, and I'm going to press a little bit harder to get my darker value. Awesome. Now I'm going to inch my way up my pencil more and press even harder and get a darker value. So we can see light, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker. Now I'm going to push a little bit harder on this one to get an even darker value. And you guessed it, on my last one, I'm going to press the hardest to get my darkest value. This is called a value scale. This is what's going to help us make our forms appear to be more three-dimensional. So I'm going to move my value scale a little bit out of the way, but I'm just going to keep it so we can see it. So we are not going to be coloring in our shapes. We're just going to be coloring in or adding value to these lines that come from our point perspective. What we're going to do is we are going to make our value darkest the closer it is to the point, and as it gets closer to the shape, we're going to get lighter value. So here we go. I'm going to start from my point, and again, you don't need to use red as your first, but I'm using my pencil pretty dark right now. Now that looks really dark. So now I'm going to make it a little bit lighter as I continue to travel up. And again, I'm not pushing my pencil really, really hard. You want to make this nice. I'm making my pencil go in the same direction. I'm not scribbling, okay? All right, so we went from darkest to lightest. I can even make this a little bit darker to kind of make it transition even a little bit better. But as you do this more, you're going to get more of a feel for using that pencil to create your different values. So I went from dark to light. Pretty awesome, right? So I'm going to use a different color. You can use just two colors if you want. I'm going to use a few. So I think I might do my next one in green. This one's a little shorter, so I'm going to start with my darkest and get a little lighter. And you're going to continue this step for every single one of your shapes. All right, and just like that, you are done. We created a form, making it appear more three-dimensional by using the element of our value. We started with our darkest values and we moved our way up our value scale to our lightest. Remember, when you're doing this, you're coloring in one direction. I did not color one way and then the other way. It might be easier for you to color this way. It might be easier for you to color the way I did it. Experiment with this. Again, this is a great way to learn about form, point perspective, and using value to make your forms appear even more three-dimensional. I can't wait to see what you come up with. If you'd like, you can do more than 6 shapes. You could do 10. You could experiment with using a star. You could do all sorts of different geometric shapes. You could do a diamond, you could do a rhombus, a trapezoid. Make this interesting. Again, 6 is what I'm looking for. If you want to do more, you can. Be creative, explore, and enjoy.